We'll be starting here momentarily. We're just going live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome here. We're going to call this meeting of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee for Thursday, February 17th to order. Mr. City Clerk, could we please do a roll call?
Certainly. Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Carlson.
Here.
Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Excellent. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, as the Vice Chair, is going to chair the meeting today. Online, I do know there are several members of administration and City Council as well. I saw Councillor Parker, I think, popped on there, as well as many members of the community for various presentations here. And in the room, as you can see, several members of administration and the public as well.
Thank you very much. We're going to start, now that we're called to order, we will start with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the people of the Canadian Plains and pays respects to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I trust everybody has had an opportunity to take a look at the agenda. Do we have any questions or additions with regards to the agenda? Seeing none, could I please have someone move to adopt the agenda? Councillor Palladino, all in favor? Thank you very much. That's carried. On to the consent agenda. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with regards to the policy committee minutes from January 20th? Seeing none, could I please have somebody approve the resolution for that the minutes of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee held on Thursday, January 20th be approved and the chair and city clerk designate be authorized to sign the same? Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Campbell, all in favor? Good, thank you very much. Moving on to presentations. Our first presentation is from Mr. Dennis Bremner regarding the Community Care Campus. Mr. Bremner, could I please have you come forward? So, just a reminder, you have 5 minutes to present. And then you have 5 minutes to present, and then council will pose questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much. You may begin.
First of all, my policy, or my whole purpose in life is to do no harm to any taxpayer or any individual when I propose this community care campus, as well as no harm to anyone, period. The objective was to make sure that businesses were left intact, that residences were left intact, that the Blackfoot Confederacy was able to then treat their own, that in fact addicts would have a home and not a shelter. And that is most important to me. For some of you, I'm sure you've went through university and whatnot. When you got to university and you appeared at your dorm, the only thing that you had that grounded you while you were there was the fact that you were given a bunk, you were given a locker, you were given a desk to study at and whatnot, and that became yours. The same thing for my military life. The only thing that I had when I first got into the military was a locker and a bunk. So the objective was to avoid the term shelter and absolutely avoid having anything to do with a shelter. Give the person a home, give them a place where they're alongside, in this case, the Blood Reserve or the Blackfoot Confederacy, and allow the Blackfoot Confederacy to work their magic and their treatment and healing systems on the individuals that were there. It is a multi-race, multi-gender facility, so if a white person wants to take traditional healing, they can. If they want to go the traditional way, they also can. It would be a totally wet facility, and I'm working with a number of people, including Alvin Mills back here, who has already started his healing lodge, or is in the process of doing so. So ultimately, in the end, the purpose was to make sure nobody suffered any harm in this city, because my projections are always different from nonprofits. My projections of the number of people make it so that if you decide that you are going to put it on the 19 acres downtown, you better build your shelter like a Mexican builds his house. Keep the rebar and the cement hanging out the top, because you're going to be putting on floor after floor after floor. The number of people that come into Lethbridge can easily be calculated based on the 2018 numbers out of the SCS. And we have grown by about 33% to 40% in the number of addicted people that we have in Lethbridge right now compared to 2020. So this allows you then to forecast out a number of years. And I got to a point where after 5 years, we were at about 600 people. Well, imagine that downtown. I'm not really sure how you could possibly cope with that. So the objective was to give you a plan B where people are housed, both the homeless and the addicted. The addicted would be on the border with the Blood and the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the homeless would be in the present shelter that is Alpha House and the Soup Kitchen. And there was a question raised that I was trying to make it into a compound by putting a fence around it. The whole objective of the fence is if you're a female and you're living in the homeless facility and you have a ex-husband who happens to be an addict in town, you don't want that person coming in easily into that facility and harassing the woman. So you put a fence around the homeless shelter. In the facility out on the Blood Reserve border, the reason I put one in there is because the Oldman River is right there. Well, if an individual is high, do you want them drowning? So we put a fence around there. It's not an imperative, it doesn't have to occur, but common sense says if you're trying to secure people's lives, then you have to make it so that when they're not necessarily in charge of their faculties, they can be still protected. They're still allowed in and out. There's no restriction. Buses would run directly from Standoff to the facility and down to Lethbridge on an hourly basis. And that would allow mothers and fathers to visit their kids and treatment to be done. And I got 1 second up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bremner. I'll open this up to members of council. Is there anybody that has any questions for Mr. Bremner? I don't see anybody in the queue, so do we have a motion for this? Right. All right, we have a motion. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee received this item as information. Could I please have somebody to move that? I can't see. Could I please have Councillor Palladino? All in favor? Could we do a roll call on that? Because I cannot see two of our other committee members online.
Certainly. Councillor Campbell.
In favor.
Councillor Carlson. Counselor Carlson.
Click the wrong button. In favor?
Thank you. Counselor Palladino.
In favor.
Counselor Schmidt-Rempel.
Favor. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Bremner, for your presentation. Next up, we have a presentation from Ms. Debbie Deek, CWSS Advisory Committee Chair, regarding the Community Wellness and Safety Strategy Advisory Committee Governance Model Update and Recommendation. Ms. Deek?
Thank you very much to the Honorable Chair and Vice Chair and City Councillor committee members for allowing this presentation to go forward today. I am currently the chair of the CWSC, and it is my honor to address you today. Next slide, please. So in getting started, you have 5 key points outlined for you here, and I know you have received an information package which accompanies this. To provide a bit of background, the CWSS was approved by City Council on May 13th, 2019. City Council directed administration to implement the CWSS using a phased approach. In phase 1, the CWSS concepts were applied internally to City of Lethbridge controlled strategies, committees, and funding portfolios. CSD restructured its internal committee governance model, consolidated criteria and processes for funding per integrated investment strategy, and implemented performance management processes. On April 20th, 2021, City Council approved implementing phase 2 of the CWSS and directed administration to leverage the existing phase 1 CWSS advisory committee to construct a new community governance model with an action-oriented committee structure with a mandate to implement the CWSS phase 2 to generate community-wide impact. Key to this work is to develop a terms of reference, defining a common vision, clear goals and objectives, performance management, and accountability. So today we are addressing these 5 points on this slide with you. We have reviewed different governance models. We wish to be aligned with that of collective community impact, and as such have formed an administrative committee. We have worked with the city solicitor, the CSD department, the city clerk, and have developed a draft terms of reference, which were approved unanimously just this week on February the 15th. Hence the delay in getting the package to you. Next slide, please. So in our current state, the funding and decision-making process is resource and labor intensive. It is bureaucratic, and it can take months to complete. Specifically, programs and initiatives submitted to the CWSS Advisory Committee for review and recommendation need to be completed. Administration on CWSS Advisory's behalf do submit to the appropriate standing policy committee, that being you people gathered today for review and recommendation, and then you submit to City Council for final approval. Next slide, please. So in our terms of reference, there are some key points that I wish to highlight today. After reviewing different structures, we wish to remain as an administrative committee comprised of key sector leaders within the community and outgoing CWSS advisory members. You have received a list of these members, but one very important and critical member was inadvertently omitted, that being representation through the Chamber of Commerce by Cindy, who is currently Cindy Voss. We would have no legal authority as a community well-being and safety committee, but we would remain that of an administrative committee. We cannot legally allocate funding, but the city manager can, providing an additional final check on recommendations. This permits agreement continuity. The city maintains legal control of the funding, but employs true community governance in terms of its model for decision making. It is important the city manager has funding allocation final approval rather than City Council. I want to be mindful that in May 2013, City Council did make an interim, City Council did make a motion, being that as the they would remain the interim decision maker for 3 funding pockets, OSSI, RH, and FCSS, and enable greater efficiency as compared to the current state. So I wish to remind you that if we have the city manager be our final checks and balances, the CWSC is not a legal entity, and as such needs a legal entity to approve dispersal of funding as recommended by this committee. The City of Lethbridge as a corporation already has this legal authority to allocate funding. For example, administration can approve virtually all of the funder agreements they manage, with the exception being the Affordable Social Housing Grant Policy. So as such, we need to have a recommendation that is inclusive today that the city manager becomes this final decision maker. The benefits of the city manager as the decision maker are outlined on the following slide. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, we can have greater efficiency, more timely responses, reduce bureaucracy, and reduce political angst. It is important City Council remain at arm's length. The true community governance model has been followed. We have comprised key sector leaders to generate collective wisdom who are devoid of conflict of interest. It is important to note that the CSD maintains its role as the backbone organization and does create synergies, continuous communication, and support. We can easily evaluate and adjust this model as we move forward and not be stalling in work that is emergent. We can explore different models as we move along. Becoming a separate legal entity is one of those that can be explored. But the city maintains legal responsibility for funding allocations, ensuring compliance with provincial and federal funding requirements. And as this committee, external organizations or entities can leverage this committee for support, guidance, and recommendations regarding CWSS issues. It would truly be that of collective impact. Next slide, please. So in terms of regarding our terms of reference and our membership selection, these were brought forward to our CWSC committee just this week, and it was unanimously agreed that in this inaugural first year, the chair and the advisory committee approved the membership that was put forward to them. Those will be outlined in future slides. So the initial membership selection is drawn from previous CWSS advisory members. We created the membership list in conjunction with what was previously established within the CWS advisory and in conjunction with the CSD. We acknowledge that we may have a few membership sector gaps in which those members will attempt to be filled in this first inaugural year. We basically need to start somewhere. We may not know the exact membership for the inaugural year, and it might shift. The first year will be an attempt to clarify the membership. This is another reason why it's nice to have this as an administrative committee. We can make these terms of reference changes relatively easily. You may wish to ask me, why isn't a member of City Council on this committee? Per City Council direction in 2021, this committee is to remain arm's length from City Council. If council members joined the committee, it would change the representation of other government agencies from administrative bureaucracies to politicians, a pretty significant change. Councillors may join action teams if they wish. Next slide, please. So in our inaugural first year, these are the key partners that have been reflected, as I said previously, with the exception of that not being listed here, being the Chamber of Commerce. And we do recognize that we do have gaps in our membership in this first year. The next slide will indicate who and what those gaps are. We have had significant input that we need to have representation from the immigrant and/or newcomer group, people who have lived experience, the faith sector, and justice and corrections. So, next slide, please. The new Community Wellbeing and Safety Committee terms of reference and governance model will fulfill these three responsibilities. They will foster true community governance. They will ensure engagement and continuous improvement. We will continually be analyzing, collecting data, reflecting on our practice and our processes, and continuously striving to improve those. We will consider and develop best practices, and we will continually be measuring and having accountability for our processes and our recommendations. This is truly a collective impact model. So in summary, if you agree with the terms of reference and the governance model, I am going to first of all remind you of two very critical pieces of background information. With the CWSC being an administrative committee, it does not have legal authority. As such, the CWSC will rely on the city to be that legal entity to approve allocation recommendations, and more specifically, that be the city manager in order to create efficiencies. However, in 2019, Council made a motion that they be the interim decision-making body for funding allocation recommendations specific to FCSS, OSSI, and Reaching Home. Therefore, the recommended action motion has three parts to it. That the SPC recommend that City Council endorse the proposed CWSC terms of reference and this governance model. That they rescind the 2019 motion, removing City Council as that interim decision-making body. And part three, acknowledge the authority to the city manager to approve funding allocations for the following funding streams in alignment with existing city processes and policies. FCSS, which is Family and Community Support Services. OSSI, which is Outreach Support Services Initiative. Reaching Home, or RH. And the City of Lethbridge Affordable Social Housing Capital Grant Program, the Community Safe Program Initiatives, the Community Service Grant Program, and the Community Capital Projects Grant Program. I could now entertain and would be delighted to answer questions or receive any comments from you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deek. Questions from council? Councillor Palladino?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Deek. These key selector leaders that you mentioned and the gaps that you referred to in them, what is the application process for membership selection?
We have done much work, Councillor Palladino, in that area. At its inception, the CWSS committee members were reflective of a broad base of community members. You see them listed there. And as we moved forward over the last 2 years in our work, people indicated from that group or those representatives from those groups if they were able to continue on with this work, because it does mean in terms of monthly meeting commitments outside of that possible time allocation. So we believe that this is a very diverse group that you see represented here, and we do have the key leaders of those organizations present. I believe that we have received very positive feedback from the people at the table. We have continually asked, have we left anybody out? Is there anybody that you can think of that we haven't included? Any groups or organizations that need to be represented? And the list that you saw as the gaps, the 4 sectors that were represented there, were brought forward by the committee members that currently sit there. That is the best answer that I can provide to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Middleton Hope?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too have a concern in regards to what process you may have put together to select members for this proposed committee. So I'm interested in perhaps what community and development have to say in regards to any process that they may be interested in applying that would identify the types of people that have the types of skill sets that they're looking for.
Perhaps, Councillor Carlson, I should direct you to have that answered by a member of the CSD. I know our group was initially organized through them, so perhaps should defer this question to Martin Thompson, if he would wish to clarify this or answer that. We were brought together under the collective organization of the CSD.
Thank you. That's where my question was directed, and it's Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Councillor Middleton Hope. So the original CWSS Advisory Committee, the selection process was where city administration approached key sector organizations, not individuals. So for example, we approached the school district as an organization, the leader of each organization, to present the CWSS concept, A, to see if they supported it, and then B, if they did, would you like to represent, who would you like from your organization to be represented on that committee? I'm happy to report that the support for the concept was extremely supportive, and for most of the organizations that we approached, it was the organizational leader that stepped up, and some comments were specifically, we feel this is such an important issue that the leader of the organization should represent that, be on that committee. Now, and so that was the interim process for the CWSS Advisory Committee. And to kind of follow up on the question that Councillor Palladino had on the selection for this committee, for this inaugural year, the committee decided let's continue with those key sector leaders as they are, but then in this inaugural year, they would take the opportunity to develop that fulsome selection process for the committees moving forward. And for example, it could be the sole responsibility of a specific action team. But I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee members. My understanding was that in this inaugural year, they would use that time to really flush out and define the ongoing committee member selection process.
Thank you,
Perfect. Thanks.
Just so that I'm clear, though, there's no formal process right now for recruitment if terms are up for committee members.
That's correct. Right now, they're simply adopting their current members.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to know. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I'm kind of just interested because I'm fascinated by your process because you got everybody in the room where it happened, and I'm sure you went through a lot of back and forth. I just want to get your take on how you got to the decisions and how difficult or how easy it was to have such a diverse group of people together to come up with the solution. If you can just sort of take us through how the sausage got made, so to speak.
So, Councillor Campbell, I really appreciate your question. And I can say to you that we have had a very cohesive, it's been a very pleasant group to work with. We haven't had much, although it's a very diverse group, bringing a lot of different perspectives to the table. We have had such good information provided to us, which is grounded in research, which is grounded in the data that has been collected relative to our community. When you have good resources and tools at your disposal and the research that accompanies that, the decision-making process becomes easier. And it is one where you can form alignment amongst the members sitting on that committee relatively easily. It is not the purview of this group to make decisions that are not grounded in the most recent information, data, policies, procedures, information that we are given. So I can say to you that it has been, and I will speak personally, a pleasure to be on this committee, to see the representatives that I have met from business, from the Indigenous community, from different sectors of our work, from the school districts, come together with a common purpose, and that is to address any of the social issues or needs that are facing our community. I don't know, I see other committee members here. I don't know if Richard Thiessen or Alan or Cindy, if any of them would like to speak to this. They have certainly been very supportive and very strongly represented throughout this whole process.
Love to hear that.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Quite a few questions. I'll do a quick one just to follow up, if I can, on Councillor Palladino and Middleton Hope's membership questions. Will City Council approve the membership, or is it self-appointed, self-approved by the committee?
I would like to answer that question. So if council approves the terms of reference, within the terms of reference, the membership is defined. So if you approve the terms of reference in the governance model, in essence, you are approving the membership of that committee.
Agreed to that, we approve the makeup of the committee, but there are citizens at large, there are appointed members from different organizations. I'm wondering if that will come in front of City Council at any time so that the council approves the membership, or is it self-appointed?
This is a technical question that I am going to defer to Martin Thompson.
Thank you.
Councillor Carlson, those details I think will be flushed out when that fulsome selection process is created. And so at that point in time, that would be a key question to be answered. And so I don't want to speak for the committee. They may recommend at that point in time that they draft the committee selection model, and they'll have to determine whether or not they want that vetted by council. But that could be one of the recommendations as you as council make as you move forward.
And thank you, Marty or Mr. Thompson. That's just the format I'm familiar with. Even like Economic Development Lethbridge, they have 27 or 32 members, but they all come to council for approval, regardless if they're being appointed or nominated by their certain sectors. So that's something we might want to explore. Thank you. Just to help me about a bit of the history of this, because what I'm seeing in the TOR and in the discussion is this is pretty much an amalgamation of two former committees we had, which was Community and Social Development and Social Housing in Action. And they basically oversaw these pots of money. They looked through them and they made the recommendations to council. And so is this just sort of an amalgamation of those two committees to sort of streamline and make sure that they're working more hand in glove? Is that the basic premise?
Councillor Carlson, I can endeavor to answer that again because I'm sure a lot of the folks on the current advisory committee don't have that history. But yes, from a high level, I would say you're very close in that in the previous model, we had many different committees, not only the CSD committee and the SHIA committee, but we had a whole bunch of other committees, Vibrant Lethbridge, CMARD, but there was no communication, no connection, no strategic direction from that holistic perspective. And so, yes, this would, in essence, be amalgamating those that previous model into one strategic leadership committee, and there will be, working committees or action committees that could specifically be that subject matter expertise group for the specific priority areas, such as, housing, homelessness, et cetera.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Madam Vice Chair, I have a raft of questions, but I'll hop out of the queue. I see other members of the committee have some, so thank you. I'll hop out and back in.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. I did see Mr. Friesen had his hand raised. Was there something, Mr. Friesen, did you have a question or something you wanted to quickly add?
I do, but I'm going to defer to Rich Thiessen first. Rich was making he wants to speak, so I'll go next.
All right, Mr. Thiessen, if you'd like to say a few words. I do have some other questions coming up from council, so if you have a few brief comments.
Just a clarification on Councillor Carlson's question. When this was set up by city management, there was three committees set up. One with the intent, the CWSS was set up with the intent of working long term to set up a process to oversee this work. The other two groups were always intended to be temporary, and moving forward, those groups would be the Housing and the Safety Committee. Those two groups would become either working action groups underneath the CWSC, and with possible participation on the CWSC. But the intent of city management when we were asked to form this and move in this direction was always that this group would become the oversight to the work that's being done, and then those groups would then be their work would be stopped or would become underneath the CWSC.
Thank you, Mr. Thiessen.
And thanks, Mr. Thiessen. I think I was referring to before your involvement in this. We had the two groups, Social Housing in Action and Community Social Development, which were committees of council, and this seems to me to be an amalgamation of those two. So that's what I was questioning. Thank you.
Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that we've fully vetted the question that myself, Councillor Palladino and Councillor Carlson have asked in regards to the makeup of this committee and a process going forward for selection, whether or not that goes to City Council or whether that or not that's being done somewhere else. So I would certainly encourage a more robust discussion and providing greater clarity in terms of what you propose in regards to membership on these committee and how you're going to address by your own admission, the various gaps that may exist currently in your membership. The next question that I have, so that was a statement more than a question. The next question I have is, in regards to funds which you're proposing are now allocated by the city manager, and I don't take umbrage with that at all. I'm wondering if there is a ceiling as to the amount of funds that the city manager would be expected to allocate on your behalf without going back to City Council for any kind of direction.
I would like to address that question. We brought this up on February 15th, just this week, when the committee met. So for dispersing funding, if you will, pot amounts, if you are inquiring about a limit which can be allocated, we asked the CWSS Advisory Committee if they thought a cap was necessary, and they did not. They were directed by council to create a community governance model, autonomous from council, and in line with that, the group is recommending no funding cap. We are recommending that we pilot this for 1 year, and if after a year, council wants to impose a funding cap, then so be it. But we are asking for the trust of council to ensure that we are making evidence-based decisions and not those which are political. It is possible that the CWSC wishes to advise council that we were asked to create this model and structure, and as such, there should be no limit.
Wow.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was wondering about the interpretation of the power of the city manager. You bring forward recommendations. Does he have would he have the power to say, no, you're not going to get that? Or how does that all play out?
I'm going to ask Martin Thompson to answer that.
Ultimately, yes, the final decision lies with the city manager. He would have the authority to veto any decision made by the committee. Now, I'm very confident he would, before he did that, would have some justification and questions and would ultimately ask for more information. But yes, the city manager would be the final sign-off on any funding allocation.
I see we have Mr. Lowen also raising his hand. Mr. Lowen, do you have some advice for us?
Yes, just to supplement the comments of Mr. Thompson. From a legal perspective, any liability that would accrue to the decision of the allocation still has to lie with a legal entity, and that remains the city. So we need, from a legal perspective, that connection. Certainly, this is an advisory board, and we expect and know that their decisions will be very good. But for that reason alone, the city manager has to retain the actual decision-making power to exercise whatever due diligence is necessary from the city perspective.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Palladino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a housekeeping question, I think, to Mr. Thiessen. The inaugural membership list lists Silverberg Group, Lethbridge. Are you not Silver Ridge?
That's Alan Friesen is with Silverberg Group. I was working with CWSS, and I have stepped off this committee because of other commitments for this year. And then it's up to the committee if I step back on in any future event. So no, I'm not on the committee moving forward.
I see that I have hands raised from Ms. Voss and Mr. Friesen. Let's call on Ms. Voss first for any brief comments you might have. All right.
Cindy, you see the bar? Got it?
I was locked off for some reason, but now I'm in. I just wanted to, I know the questions come up quite a bit about membership and who and what and why. And, you know, when this group was initially put together, as Mr. Thompson identified, there was key industries picked, such as the Chamber of Commerce, I'll use as an example. I felt it essential and important that me as the CEO step in at that time, just so we could look at how we're going to develop this. We're fully aware that we need to look at skill analysis. We need to make sure that the right leaders are at the table with the correct expertise and knowledge to be educated on to make some of these recommendations to the city manager and to council. So it isn't something that has been neglected at any point, and it is defined, it will be defined, and it will be set forth working out more this year. So it is something we've talked about a lot. So I didn't want that perception to be that it wasn't something that was heavily discussed. We're talking about, you know, looking at those resumes. Who is the best leader that represents that group? The who, the why, and the what, and making sure that those decision makers or those people that can help bring the expertise forward are at the table.
Thank you, Ms. Voss. I see Councillor Carlson has a question.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And again, thank you all for being here to answer the questions and give us all this information. Much appreciated. Just help me out here. And I know there's a decision tree and everything, but I just need some clarity, because in the presentation, it talks about, on one slide, City Council being the final approval body. And on the very next slide, it talks about the city manager being the final approval body. And so I just need to know exactly what that means. Is city council just giving full authority to city manager? We won't ever even see it and raise our hands? Or does it come, the city manager is the presents it to council, and council says yay or nay, and then he's the signing authority. I'm just not sure exactly. If somebody can just give me complete clarity on that, please.
I'm going to ask Martin Thompson to respond to that.
Thank you, Ms. Deek.
Councillor Carlson, I apologize if the slide was confusing. It was meant to show the current state today that City Council is that, as per that resolution, the interim decision maker, and then they're asking to transition that, to be at arm's length of City Council as requested. And so as part of this work, in the more fulsome package, not in the PowerPoint presentation that you received, one of the key tasks moving forward is for the committee to develop a community and City Council communication strategy. Communication is going to be critical, not only to City Council, but to the community, because remember, this is a community entity, collective impact. And so, we in the committee envisions that could that be a quarterly report where the chair of the committee reports directly to City Council? Again, some of those details can be worked out, but the key message there is communication, transparency to the community and to City Council is critical.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I'm just going to assume then that City Council will set the budget where we put our FCSS contribution and perhaps some of the other dollars that we've provided for housing initiatives, etc., and completely turn that over to the committee. They will make the decisions in consultation with the community and the membership, etc., and the city manager will approve. Is that exactly the way it'll work?
Yes, but I will invite our city treasurer to weigh in on that, because remember, these are still, because the city is the legal entity, it's still your dollars, and it still has to come forth to City Council in a budget for you to approve. And so you, like any other department budget in the city, you will still be privy to that. You will still actually approve that budget. We're simply transitioning some of those day-to-day operational decisions to this committee. I'm not sure, Daryl, if I spoke correctly, but I invite you to comment.
Doesn't look like he's on the line right now, Mr. Thompson.
And Mr. Thompson, thank you for that. That's the way I sort of envisioned it working. I just wanted the complete clarity on that. So thank you for that. My next question follows on, and I've been out of this world for a while, so help me out here. FCSS dollars require an FCSS committee board administrator, and that to be dispersed and to administer the grants, do all the reporting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can you explain to me under this new system how that functions, please? Again, Debbie, if it's okay with you, I can answer that. But you are right. The OSSI, the provincial OSSI program, the provincial FCSS program, and the federal Reaching Home program all have specific requirements for a community-based governance committee model. And so this model 100% complies with the funding requirements of all three of those funding sources to have that community-based governance decision model. Excellent, thank you. Will the committee retain their membership with the FCSSAA for all the networking, educational, and training resources they provide? Absolutely, 100%. It's in already within our current backbone or CSD administration budgets for them to attend not only the FCSS key conferences, but also the Reaching Home and the OSSI conferences. Agreed. Thank you. I appreciate that confirmation. Madam Vice Chair, I do have one last question, but I don't know if anyone else is in the queue. I couldn't see any
No.
of my colleagues' hands up.
Yeah, no,
So-
go ahead. I have a couple questions too, but you go ahead first, Councillor Carlson.
Hopefully this will be my last, Madam Vice Chair. When I read through the TOR and it talks about the allocations, I think it's allocations, I don't have it open, but I think I remember the allocation of resources. And everything in there speaks to the finite buckets that are provided by the provincial and federal government, and then our teeny tiny municipal contribution. And so is it envisioned that that's all the work that the committee will do? Or is it envisioned that the committee would maybe approach City Council at budget time and say, you know, we'd like a little more dollars to do some of the really good work. And if you increased a budget line here or over here and gave us that authority, we could do what's necessary. I just don't see that in the terms of reference. And I would hate to say, nope, that's the only dollars you're ever getting forever and ever, amen. When you might say, we need some more dollars. We know that Lethbridge spends, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Thompson, I think you said we spend about 35% of what other communities do on social services. And so I'm just wondering if the committee would be looking at, I always hate to say come to us and ask for money, but if there's necessary things, I just don't see a group, or I don't see that listed in your terms of reference. And I'm wondering if that's a miss.
I'm going to ask Martin Thompson to explain that. I'm going to say, Councillor Carlson, that we recognize very much that we are in an inaugural year. And certainly those were the areas of funding that had been addressed as the budget lines that we were to be looking at and make recommendations forward to the city manager regarding those expenditures. Outside of that, we had not had discussions around what our purview would be in that regard. So perhaps there would be a point in time where we would need to revisit the terms of reference. We would need to revise them and adopt them. As I said in the presentation, we wish to be responsive to the needs of this community, as well as to the data that is being collected, the ongoing assessment process. And I'm just going to say, if Mr. Thompson, if Martin Thompson wishes to add anything to that, I would invite him to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Dees. And the only reason I raise it is because we are heading into a 4-year budget that we're working on right now. And while it's not impossible to open up a budget, it's easier to do it in a 4-year cycle. So just my thoughts, unless Marty had something else. Sorry, Mr. Thompson had something else.
So as a committee, they're hoping for a timely response on the new governance model. We know there's going to be questions. We know there's going to need to be some changes. But the hope is that we land on a model sooner than later so the committee can go away and define their priorities and then come back to City Council and with potentially some specific asks. And knowing that this is a budget year, you're right, time is of the essence. But, right now, the model would be that CSD, through the Director of Community Services, would make that ask. Well, wouldn't it be powerful if this was the committee that did the dirt work and came forth and made an evidence-based ask? And so the timing is tight, but the timing is also good.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I agree. It's easy to say no to you. It's hard to say no to a community group that has done the dirt work, as you say, and is coming in front of council to speak on behalf of the community. So I'd like to see that as well. Anyways, Madam Vice Chair, I'll go away now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. I do see 2 members of the committee have their hands raised. If you have some brief comments you'd like to add, I would entertain those. Councillor or Mr. Thiessen.
Thank you. Alan was ahead of me, but I'll be quick, Alan. In response to Councillor Carlson's comments, if you really want to dream, we want to, if this gets functioning as we've talked of earlier as a dreaming group, as when we started this, we'd also like funds to come from other organizations to sponsor our community work. For us to see this committee working well and to making real community decisions with evidence-based action and priorities, we would see that maybe there would be faith groups that would be funding this group as well. There would be other fundraising opportunities and other groups that would step into this. So this isn't just government funds. What we envision and dream about is that this would eventually be a real community-driven advisory committee that says us as a community want to make these changes, and that's why we have the people at the table we do, in order to touch all of these different organizations, both from leadership on the grounds and also leadership as in fundraising. So
Thank you, Mr. Thiessen. I love the dream.
Mr. Friesen?
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of concern expressed around who is on this committee, who's around the table. And I understand that because the decisions made there have huge implications for the well-being of our community, right? Change from suffering and pain and addiction to health and community and rebuilding people's lives. So that's where we got to get. And so we're all concerned about we're all concerned, where there is a concern for who's around the table. Why wouldn't we make this based on somebody who's coming forward, who has the skills and talent and the dedication? They want to make this work. They've got the drive to do it. So I say our meeting should be live streamed and open to Facebook comments as we go. And then if we're having a discussion and Sandra says, here's my idea, we say, let's talk about that idea, Sandra. Sandra, you've somebody with lived experience. Come join us. Come sit around the table. That's my comment. I think it should be very, very transparent, very open, engage everybody in this process, because the agencies that we're putting in charge of this, they don't have the resources to do it. It's going to come to us. We got to make this happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Friesen. Seeing no one else in the queue, I do have a few questions for the committee myself. You recognize that there are gaps in the inaugural membership list. I don't see seniors included anywhere on this list. Is there a reason that seniors were not engaged or included on this list?
I could say to you that was not brought forward from the committee when they examined this. We looked very closely at membership on this list, and that was not a group that came forward. But perhaps in our inaugural year, as I've stated, and I would take that under very serious advice and consideration, that would be a group that we would need to have represented here in terms of moving forward, who needs to be at the table. That is a very sound recommendation.
I would, and because we do have a number of seniors in this community who experience all of the issues we are talking about, certainly something to be recommended. Another thing that I saw throughout the presentation and throughout the notes, that you will be probably needing some administrative support. You're looking at the communications piece. Will you be relying on the city CSD or other city departments to assist with that? Or have you discussed with the other city departments, or have you got plans in place for how that will look? Or if there's capacity for that within the city?
As we have moved forward in this work, we have proceeded with the understanding that the CSD would be the backbone organization for this and provide the type of administrative support that would be necessary regarding agendas, minutes, that kind of thing. So the answer to your question is that department at the city is the backbone for our committee and would provide that type of support for the committee to do its work.
Then I guess I will direct that question to Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox, is there capacity within your department to fulfill those duties?
Thank you. Through the chair, we currently provide backbone support to 3 entities. So this would actually be funneling it into the one group. And yes, we currently do, and we reach out to others that are more than happy to help out on certain issues at those times. It allows for more public engagement and dealing with some of the issues that arise.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from members of council?
Madam Vice Chair?
Yep, Councillor Carlson?
Sorry, thank you. You did trigger a question from me that I hadn't crossed off my list about the membership. Looking back to the groups that I'm just curious, was it an intention to keep any organizations that may receive funding through these streams off this list? Because as Madam Vice Chair pointed out, FCSS is one of the major funders of seniors programs, and they are not represented. I'm thinking of things like FCSS is family, family, children, seniors, community. I'm just wondering if there was an intention to leave those groups out because they may be applying for funding, or how would they be represented or be part of this? If you can maybe help me out with that.
I have two parts to say in response to your question. One is that no group was ever intentionally left out. And when we have made recommendations in the past, which have included funding allocations to indeed representatives that were on this committee, they were recused. They were not part of those discussions. They were not present for that. So we have recognized that there have been, for example, I'll just use as an example, school districts that receive funding, and they are recused during those discussions. They are not any part of that. So there is not a conflict in terms of that. And no group has been intentionally or in any way left out from representation in terms of membership. That has never been a part of our discussion.
Thank you for that. No, appreciate that. And so is that, as Madam Vice Chair raised and I've highlighted, is that a concern that the committee that may be a gap because those FCSS dollars do have to flow to those other groups that support those sectors in our community? Is that something you'd be open to adding somehow?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Councillor.
Debbie, Janelle knows what to say. She's ready. Put her in.
I guess my point was I was very involved in FCSS and community and social development for 15 years. And we always had seniors at the table. We did all the aging in place work. We coordinated all of that. It is one of the biggest asks of FCSS in our community. And as Madam Vice Chair highlighted, they don't seem represented. There isn't a voice. Is that a gap that needs to be addressed?
I have certainly written that down on my notes here to take back to the group and identify as certainly a group that needs to be represented at the table. And I think if Janelle is keen to answer some part of that, I would certainly invite her to comment.
If that's okay, I will comment. I don't know if I'm keen about it, but I'll do it. United Way has the same challenge, and I understand what you're saying, Jeff. We have to be very cautious on those votes and on those recommendations when we're actually receiving those funds. So obviously they can't be involved in those discussions at that level. United Way was very careful coming to this table because of that, but we have never in history received those funds, and we do that intentionally so that we can be part of this collaboration and to support the work going on in the community, both from the city's perspective and from United Way's perspective. So we will certainly not be in that position. What we can do is offer that collaborative perspective from our nonprofit communities and our service groups to bring those recommendations forward from that lens. We do have a really robust impact committee from our perspective in our organization that works with those groups and those service providers. So certainly we are happy to be that voice at the table as best as we can. I do know that we will be leaning heavily on groups like Shenla, Lydia, those types of community groups that have expertise in particular areas. It was very important in our conversation at this level that we recognize that we need to lean on those groups. We need to have those conversations before we can make big recommendations on those dollars. So I do foresee us engaging those conversations moving forward as this committee, and that has been highly prioritized in our conversations at this group.
Thanks, Janelle. Appreciate that. And just a final thought, you did highlight as one of the gaps as people with lived experience. And I think there was two. I closed it, so I'm just going to go from memory. There was 2 citizens at large. Is that the intent, to have those as people with lived experience, or is this outside of those? And what type of lived experience? Because there are folks. Poverty is a big one that I see as a gap. You need those folks representing poverty, and so I'm just wondering. And addictions, etc. The list could go on. So how are you going to identify folks with lived experience and bring their input or ideas, thoughts to the table? That idea of nothing for us without us type idea.
Your question is a very good one, and we have indeed discussed this as a group. And we have recognized that while we've done our very best to identify to you and be very open and transparent about our membership and who we believe is important to have at the table, we understand there can be people at the table who don't just fit their finite little, okay, this is me and this is what I'm representing. I also have this. I also bring this to the table, and I understand that. So in our first year, as we look to address these areas, we will need to explore that, Councillor Carlson, very carefully. And what do we mean as what can a person represent, for example, people who've had addictions and lived in poverty and perhaps have been homeless, and maybe they're not now, and maybe they can bring that perspective, or do they have to bring all of that to the table? That's why we are put together the best as we can in our terms of reference, a membership list as inclusive as of all the groups. And I take into great consideration that we have not included seniors, and they need to be represented in there. People with lived experience can be represented. I remember discussions at the table where our Government of Alberta representative who was sitting there said, you need to be very careful in how you define this. What do you mean by that? So all of that is still in process in our inaugural year. This is something that we're really going to have to pay attention to and define very clearly, so that we are very clear in our communication, certainly back to you and to our broader community, about who we have at the table and why.
Thank you for that. And I just to tie a bow on the one point that has been raised, would the group be open to amending the term of reference? And I'm going to throw it back to you folks, because if we did say seniors representation, I don't know what that means. Does that mean a representative from Nordbridge or LSCO or some other, just a person over the age of 65? I'm just not sure how you'd accomplish that. But would you be open to amending the TOR before it goes to council for approval, or at council? And do you have any, and would you be open to providing a recommendation of how you'd like to see that in place, if you're open to it in the first place?
And that was actually, just to follow up with what you were saying there, Councillor Carlson, that was actually something I was going to suggest with a motion, that perhaps this be referred, the TOR, that this all be referred to the Director of Community Services to work with Community Wellbeing Safety Strategy Advisory Committee to sort of work through some of these gaps and amend the TOR before we take it to council for final approval, and to fill some of these gaps, such as the seniors, such as people with lived experience, as well as perhaps including an application process, at least a framework for application process, as well as some spending cap guidelines, because I think and from what I've heard from everybody sitting around this table and in this meeting, there seem to be some concerns around that as well. So perhaps if the committee would like to sort of answer that, I just wanted to follow up Councillor Carlson's question.
Thank you.
So you would like to see this then returned once we have revised these terms of reference in terms of inclusivity, specifically around the groups that has been identified today, and define with greater boundaries than we have today the people that have been, or the groups that have been identified as having gaps. Is that how I am understanding this?
I mean, we can take a brief recess here to sort of formulate that motion and capture that for you. Councillor Carlson, you had a question?
I'm wondering for speed and efficacy, rather than it being punted back to admin and the committee to then come back to this committee in a month and then go to city. We're looking at 6 to 8 weeks. I'm wondering if you've heard us, if something we could recommend that this go to council, and your committee or administration could provide at that council meeting some possible amendments that we could make right at that meeting to sort of address some of the concerns. That it was a thought I had, rather than waiting 6 to 8 weeks.
Well, and alternatively, Councillor Carlson, what we could do is make the recommendation for it to go to CSD and then come straight back to council with those changes, as opposed to coming back to this committee.
Yes, whatever we can do to make it faster.
Yeah, I just think that it needs some work before it goes to council.
That would certainly be agreeable. I know that we have been questioned by certain members of the community why we're not moving faster as it is. So anything that could speed up the process would be ideal. That's my response as chair, and I'm not sure if I should be asking for Martin Thompson to address this, as these amendments would go back to his department and then come forward back to you.
The city administration is happy to support both the committee and council's wishes, and will work as diligently as we can to get this done.
So, Mr. Fox, the question to you: if we were to refer this to your group to work through some of these questions we have and get them involved in the terms of reference, would you be able to bring that back to would your group be able to bring that back to council to the March 8th meeting? Would that timing work?
Through the chair, we would work as fast as we can with the committee and bring it to the first council meeting that it's ready for. I can't say for sure with the deadlines that it would be the March 8th one, but we could strive for that.
Councillor Carlson, would that be amenable to you?
Is that the two? That's our meeting 2 weeks from now, right?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. For me, I want to not be what's holding the committee up from doing the necessary and good work. So yes, that would be excellent. I just have then a further question for our administration, if I can, Madam Co-Chair or Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Fox, what input do you need right now? Because we've had vague questions about caps, et cetera. Rather than us sending you away with vague thoughts of what we're thinking, what do you need from us is the first question. And while you ruminate on that, I'll ask a further question. Turning over the spending authority, I'm going to be honest. I appreciate council being much higher level and saying, here's your budget, go be and do. And although that's not been the way it's worked here in the past, we've said, here's your budgets, go be and do, and then bring everything back to us for administrative approvals. I guess it'd probably be Mr. Thompson. Sorry, I told you had time to think while I asked another question, but it's to you. Do other communities do it this way? Do they, say Edmonton, Calgary, et cetera, do they just say, here, I don't know what they call them. They're FCSS committees, they're housing committees. Do they just turn over the budgets and say, go and be and do, or do they approve and give the city manager the signing authority? Or do they want everything to come back in front of them? I'm just not clear how other communities do it and if it's appropriate.
Councillor Carlson, it is all over the map, but the majority of the communities use a community governance model to approve those allocations and have a connection to the city through annual reports, quarterly reports, and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And then to my first question, what information do you need from us if I gave you enough?
Through the chair, I also want to assure you that if the city manager was uncomfortable with some of the spending, I am sure that he would bring it forward to council and let the committee know that that's what he was doing. So there is that fail-safe in giving spending authority. To move forward on the terms of reference, if we were going to put a cap, we would need to know what that cap would look like from council. Is it an amount per expenditure, or is it an amount per function? So we would need to know that for each sort of line of funding. So there is some of that information that we would need to have direction from council on to try and set caps for different types of funding. And whether it's city funding, provincial funding, or the federal funding, although we would be discussing those a lot of the times through the budget process, we would need those to add them into the governance model.
And thank you for that, Mr. Fox, because I'm just trying to imagine this in current city council world. And honestly, I'd like to get it to be, and I'll just use an example in my brain, similar to either economic development, Lethbridge, or Lethbridge Police Service, where they come to council and say, these are our 4-year goals, aims, objectives. Here's what we want to achieve. And we say, yes, here's the budget. It's the OSSI funding, it's the FCSS, it's the Reaching Home, and maybe you've asked for a little extra or whatever. And we say, there's your budget. Go and be and do and give us annual reports. And it's only when council feels those are straying from what the asks to what the outcomes are, that's when council would get involved to say, no. You said you're going to do A, B, C, and what you're reporting on is X, Y, Z. I'd rather hand it over to the folks who understand what they're doing, know what they're doing, are on the ground, and just sort of be the oversight body in the end. So that's my 2 cents, but perhaps my other colleagues who may want other types of caps and things could maybe give some ideas what they were thinking.
I think for myself, Councillor Carlson, you captured that perfectly. When I looked at this, I was also thinking of an EDL model, where exactly they would report to council with the goals and objectives that they were looking at. There would be a formal laid out application and selection process. And like you said, names would come to us so that we could take a look at that and be aware of who was on council as well. And certainly that's what I was looking at too, and making sure that those gaps were provided for and being investigated for what those members were, and making sure we're outlining what voting and non-voting members, being very specific about what that looks like. Should we just, checking in with my colleagues on this committee, should we just take a brief recess to put this motion together and then come back? Are we good with that? Councillor Carlson?
Sure.
I'm good with that.
You're okay with that, Councillor Campbell? Okay, yep. We're going to take a 5-minute recess to give our city clerk's office an opportunity to pull this motion together, and then we will bring that back. Thank you very much. All right, we are back and doing some work with our city, members of our city clerk's office here. We formulated a message or a motion just based on all the notes that members of the city clerk's office took, I took, and then members of our administrative team took. So, motion that we have, I think we're going to bring that up here. Okay. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee refer this matter to the Director of Community Services to work with the Community Wellbeing Safety Strategy Advisory Committee to develop and outline a selection process for membership on the committee, develop an outline of a budget process, develop a reporting process for the annual report around key performance indicators, and address perceived gaps in membership, and submit to City Council no later than March 22nd, 2022. And we discussed with Mr. Fox that March 22nd date as the latest date. He is going to look at an earlier date depending on the capacity of his unit. Members of this committee, are there any questions with regards to this motion? Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just a question on and I'm sorry, my eyes are not good, address perceived gaps in membership. Do we want to highlight what those perceived gaps are? The one sorry, Madam Chair. The one we talked about
go ahead.
Was seniors. While you were, we did talk about some others that I'm not sure how to address them. They are sort of folks with lived experience, but that's been identified by the committee itself. The one that we talked offline a bit, that I see another gap is youth, and that might be addressed through our Youth Advisory Council appointing a member.
Oh, yeah.
So that, I don't know if we want to identify the gaps that we
What we can do is, Mr. Fox is taking notes, and we can certainly forward that on to his group to make sure that those are looked at. If you would like them in the motion, we can include them in the motion.
I wouldn't want to see it come back and not address it, but if Mr. Fox has heard seniors and youth, and I would nominate Youth Advisory Committee, or I would mention Youth Advisory as a possible
as well as
source.
those with lived experiences. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those three.
That's top of mind for me. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fox, you've made note of those?
Through the chair, yes, I have.
Okay. Any other changes to this motion from the committee? All right, seeing none, could I get a motion? Could I get somebody to approve this motion? Councillor Campbell?
Yes,
yep.
Oh, yeah.
No,
just a comment. Just wanted to say congratulations to this committee for all the work you've done. I know it's a monumental task to get all these people in the room, but people are dedicated. They really want to make a difference, and you're making a difference. And this is just the next step to really doing what you're setting out to do. So I applaud you. And with that, I hope we accept this motion.
Could I get a mover?
Carlson.
Okay. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you very much. And yes, absolutely, thank you very much to this committee for all the hard work that you're doing. We certainly appreciate it, and we recognize it, and we're looking forward to moving this forward. Thank you. Next up, I have Mr. Perry Stein, Indigenous Relations Advisor, National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Recommendation and Work Plan Update. Thank you, Mr. Stein.
When people call me Mr. Stein, I think they're talking to my dad still, so I have to get used to that. Thank you, everyone. The purpose of the presentation today is to provide members of the Standing Policy Committee with an update on the approved National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls recommendations and work plan. Next slide, please. So I'll provide a quick update on, or kind of an overview of where this has been, and understanding that this was approved by a previous council to ensure that members of this SPC are aware of the journey that we've been on to date. I'll highlight some of the key initiatives that we have completed or have initiated, as well as some of the projects that are upcoming for 2022. Next slide, please. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was launched in December of 2015, and I've quoted here with one of the key motives being to investigate systemic causes of all forms of violence perpetrated against Indigenous women and girls, including sexual violence, and that includes also members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. Shortly after the calls for justice were released by the National Inquiry, City Council directed the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee to review those calls and come back with a set of recommendations for Council to consider. The work initiated through the Reconciliation Committee and kind of facilitated by the Indigenous Relations Office at that time involved participation from that committee, as well as other community groups with a kind of an interest in the work, including most specifically the Sisters in Spirit Committee. We worked for a significant amount of time to review each of those, I think it's 231 calls for justice, to understand their alignment to the work of City Council and the work of City Administration. Those recommendations were brought back to City Council in October of 2022, and Council requested that a work plan and formal budget ask be brought back. That work plan and budget was approved by City Council in January of 2021 and included a set of 25 recommendations and guiding principles that would continue that work going forward. Since then, the Indigenous Relations Office, with the support and guidance of the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee, have been working diligently to move these recommendations forward. Next slide, please. The shorthand for how we've kind of broken apart those 25 recommendations you can see on your screen, and this is a kind of a one-page summary that we've shared with the community in the past year. It shows the work taking place in 4 different areas: governance, social, economic, and education. I've highlighted for you with a red circle those initiatives which have either been completed or initiated in 2021, so the first 12 months that we've worked on this work plan. And I've also highlighted some of the partnerships that we've created to support this work. So, for example, we're working directly with the Piikani Nation to develop the Indigenous Awareness Training Program for all city staff. We're working with the Lethbridge Sisters in Spirit Committee, including just recently on February 14th, to highlight and to find those moments to commemorate and honor victims and survivors and families of this genocide. We're working with the United Way on a number of programs, including the development of an anti-racism campaign and the development of, or the kind of the advancement of that the Rec and Culture fee assistance work. The University of Lethbridge is also working with us on the anti-racism campaign through their Dillon School of Business, and on providing more general support for the educational work that we do across the community. SAMIS is working with us on the Transit Fee Assistance Program, which has just finished up, and we just received the final report of that pilot. And then other groups such as the Lethbridge Public Library, the Public Art Committee, Sage Clan, and Blood Tribe have been working with us on a number of projects as well. Next slide, please. To highlight some of the work, so again, this work plan was approved in January of 2021. In February, we began work on the development of an Indigenous Awareness Training Program for city staff. And in that work plan, it included a direction to ensure that this training, once developed, become mandatory for all city staff. So we are in the development phase. We have some draft content, and we're just working to finalize that, and we'll be looking to pilot some of that training in the next several months with city staff. We've also incorporated a gender-based analysis, or GBA plus, into the council submission process. Then we've partnered with that with the city clerk's office to be able to provide some resources to city staff so that when they're analyzing the social impacts of the recommendations or reports they're bringing to council, that lens can be incorporated. We, of course, signed the MOU with the Kainai Nation, with Chief Fox and previous Mayor Spearman. That was ratified in May and formally signed in September of last year. Last year, we also had our first intake of Indigenous summer students, which was a very successful project. We had 6 Indigenous summer students across the organization in very different departments, including finance, purchasing, the Waste and Recycling Center, the Lethbridge Public Library, the Galt Museum, and have just now been working on the second year of intake for that program, and we'll be releasing those positions in the next couple weeks and working with our partners at the university and the college and Red Crow College to find students to fill some of those positions for the summer. As I mentioned, we've also begun partnership work with the United Way and developing an anti-racism campaign that takes a social marketing perspective to encourage allyship in our community. And that was based on some of the cultural advice from our Reconciliation Committee members that from a Blackfoot perspective, we should be emphasizing a strength-based approach and a positive approach as opposed to a negative approach. So that's the pivot from an anti-racism campaign to an allyship campaign. In August of last year, as was one of the recommendations in the work plan, City Council permanently declared October 4th to be Sisters in Spirit Day, which is an important move in this community and probably one of the first communities in Canada to have done so. Also in September, we released our first Reconciliation Annual Report, which has been available on our website since that time and highlights in much more detail than I've gone into here the work that took place between September of 2020 and September of 2021, including the work in the MMIWG work plan and then more broadly the work of the Reconciliation Committee and Indigenous Relations Office. And then finally, I've highlighted here we had the release of the MMIWG and allyship toolkits within the community, which made kind of provided more resourcing to community members who are interested in embarking on this journey to understand how they might start that work, how they might advance that work, or if they're already in that space, how they might take it to the next level. And we've had lots of positive feedback on that. And that includes the Okian welcome video that was played at Council's inauguration for the first time, and we've been using in the community ever since. Next slide, please. And I believe this is my last slide. This is some of the areas that we're focusing on for this year, including an Indigenous Women's Emergency Shelter Needs Assessment. This was the highest priority need identified by the community when we were developing the recommendations to bring to Council. So we have identified a Blackfoot researcher, and we are very excited to work with her, and we're just finalizing the procurement pieces on that, and she'll be initiating her work in the next few weeks to bring back a needs assessment on, as I mentioned, an Indigenous Women's Emergency Shelter, and to help us develop an advocacy strategy to work with other levels of government to move that forward along. As I've already talked about, the Indigenous awareness training for city staff. The third one I highlighted that we're beginning work on this year is the Indigenous Legacy Commemoration Project. So in both the TRC implementation plan and this MMIWG work plan, we've identified the need to create some sort of a commemoration of victims and families and survivors of genocide. And so this is that community engagement exercise to understand what the community's perspectives are and interests are and needs are in that space. And we'll be working with a member of the Blackfoot community to move that project forward and to conduct community engagement. The next project is a benefits-driven procurement. This is identified in the work plan as an Indigenous procurement strategy. I've been working with the purchasing department to expand the scope of that a little bit to ensure that we're including the voices of local procurement and other equity-deserving peoples in that broader conversation about what is typically called social procurement and what we're calling here benefits-driven procurement. And at an upcoming economic SPC committee meeting, I'll be providing a report on that and to help members of that SPC understand where that project has been and where it's going and the engagement completed to date. The work to update the reconciliation plan is also in the works for this year. That it's hard to believe that our reconciliation plan is now 5 years old, which is quite amazing when you look at the other cities in Canada who are just starting this work. I mean, the City of Toronto just this year approved a reconciliation plan, and ours is 5 years old, so we have some work to do to update that to ensure that the strategic direction in that plan continues to meet the needs of the community. And so that work will be ongoing and probably led by my predecessor or my successor. The Eyes in Motion program, which is an existing program of Lethbridge Transit, will be reviewed to ensure that it, as identified in this work plan, has opportunities to support Indigenous women in distress as well. And the last two I've mentioned, which I've already kind of talked to a little bit, are the Rec and Culture Fee Assistance that we're working with the United Way on, and continued support for different events and different community initiatives through this funding as well. So looking forward to those items coming up over the year. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stein. Some very important work going on in our community. I will now open this up to questions from council. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Stein Jr. Sorry, Perry. Perry, thank you for the update. Mr. Stein, thank you so much for the update. Really appreciate it. Lots of work happening. I'm going to ask a question that is going to be hard to answer. But when I look at the outcomes, and they are basically outputs, right? This will be created. This will be, and I know in the world of in the social aspect of world, it's hard to measure things, and it's hard to sort of talk about what the end goal is, like to put up a monument. But I'd really like to talk somewhere about those hard to measure goals and outputs and aspirations. What are we hoping that this work and these activities, investments, and what are we hoping to achieve? Is there something that we can sort of hang our hat on and say, you know, we're doing all this, and it's because in 10 years, 5 years, hopefully 2 years, 100 years, this is the world, some sort of vision statement or some aspirational statement. Is that something we can talk about or quantify?
I appreciate the question, Councillor Carlson. I've just written down aspirational statement, and I think that's something that we should be bringing back to the update of the reconciliation plan. I think that helps maybe our community understand what it is that we're striving for. It's hard within the confines of a 3-year work plan to suggest that, and I don't think this is what's being suggested by council, but to suggest that the work is done. I think if I was to summarize what I understand the outcomes to be, I think I've identified 3 things. From a community's perspective, I think this is to demonstrate that the broader community and the city of Lethbridge as an organization cares. I know at the recent memorial event held at City Hall on the 14th, some of the anecdotal feedback we had was, it's nice to see the city of Lethbridge actually caring, actually showing up to participate in this work. And I know that we've been working in this space for a number of years now, but I don't know if everybody in the community truly understands that. And we often do work at a high-level planning space, and I don't know if we do enough at the boots on the ground. And so that was a good reminder to continue to working at the level of community. The other thing that and this was something that I was reminded of when I first started working with the city was, tell me how any of this work impacts the day-to-day lives of individual people living in this community. And there is a more, I'm going to say, emotional perspective on that, which goes back to my first point, is that the community demonstrates its ability to care, to be compassionate and empathetic, but also some of the things that we're doing around educating our staff, providing those opportunities for Indigenous students to come and get job experience, which is also at the same time actually job experience for our own city staff, learning how to work with more diverse colleagues. Those are getting a lot more tangible, as well as the things like the Rec and Culture Fee Assistance work that we're doing and the anti-racism campaign. Those are starting to change, or the intent is to change the energy of the community to embody those values of reconciliation and truth. And the third piece that I'll mention, which I think is maybe more of a corporate outcome or a performance indicator, which is the strength of our relationships. I often kind of remark that you can demonstrate the strength of your relationship by how quickly somebody picks up the call if you need something or you need to ask a question. And we have had a growing and a strengthening relationship with Indigenous community partners in the last number of years, and in particular in the last 3 years, and even more so in the last 12 months since this work plan was adopted. The amount of Indigenous community serving organizations, different departments at different nations, other municipalities across the entire country reaching out to us, looking for advice and partnership and collaboration has grown exponentially. So I would say those are just a quick way of thinking about some of those, what are we actually doing in this space, like from a measurement perspective. But I just to kind of bring it back, I do think this idea of an aspirational statement or a vision statement is a powerful one and one that we can bring back.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. I appreciate that. I thought I was going to stump you because it's always easy to say the how and the what, but to answer that, the question of why. And I think that's an important thing to have a conversation about. Why are we doing this and why do we need to do it? So thank you for that.
Is it okay if I add just one small thing to that question?
If the chair allows.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I recall, I think 2 councils ago, when we first started talking about it, at that point it was under the auspices of the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. That was one of the things that we were discussing. And I remember there was questions of, is it our responsibility to be doing this work? Or is this a jurisdictional question? This should be work that is funneled through the provincial government or the federal government? And I think the answer to that question is still relevant today, which is, there are 5,000 plus Indigenous residents of this community. They aren't residents of a different community. It might be members to other nations, but this is still work that's impacting the day-to-day lives of residents of the city of Lethbridge. So it's important work to do, and there's a lot of work to do, especially around education awareness. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. One comment I have, and it just sort of follows up with what Councillor Carlson said. Mr. Stein, do we collect, because you talk about the anecdotal stories, do we collect the impact stories anywhere? And maybe that's something that your successor could look at. I think about that from my other job. And that's one of the key things we do, because like Councillor Carlson said, it's difficult to understand the impact. It's because we don't have the measurable numbers. But the impact stories, we do have the impact stories. You have a perfect impact story from the other night. It's perfect to see that the City of Lethbridge cares, right? That we're listening. Impact stories from students that are coming to work here, impact stories from staff, those sorts of things. I'm just wondering if maybe that will help us move forward to make sure we're collecting those.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. We have been collecting some of those impact stories. So in our annual report, we included some kind of vignettes of the Indigenous summer students who worked with us this year. And we also use some of those stories in I think, some internal messaging around recruiting for this year's intake. The transit pilot project we did with SAMIS, there's also, there were entry and exit surveys with clients, and we were able to understand what are the barriers in accessing employment, and what can a transit fee assistance do to remove some of those barriers. And then the work to develop the toolkits was fundamentally based on lived experience and understanding the perspectives of Indigenous women in the context of the MMIWG toolkit and other community members in the context of the Allied toolkit. So I think it's important that we kind of highlight those impact stories, and we've continued to do that, I think, through the Indigenous awareness training that we'll be developing, through the stories of elders and probably some youth in there as well. And then I think that's largely, I don't know if Janelle's still around, but if I'm thinking too far ahead with the anti-racism campaign, part of that work is to encourage allyship, and I think that's going to be through the voices of existing allies and what brought them to this space and how that would encourage others. So I think absolutely that those impact stories are very important.
Have questions from other members of council? Seeing none, I have a motion here. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee receive this item as information. Could I get a mover, please? Councillor Campbell? All in favor? I don't see your face up there, Councillor Carlson, so I'm trusting you're in favor. Perfect. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to submissions. We have a submission from Monica Lowen and Josh Marty, SSIG co-chairs, read the Social Services Integration Group, SSIG update. I trust everybody had an opportunity to read through that. And I see we have Mr. Marty online. Does anybody have any questions with regards to that submission? Okay, seeing no questions for that submission, we have a motion. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee receive this item as information. Could I get a mover, please? Councillor Campbell? All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to our next submission, we have Mr. Kim Galucci, General Manager, NMAC Center, NMAC Center update. We do have Mr. Galucci here in chambers. Does anybody have any questions for him regarding the submission?
Just from Councilor Campbell here.
Thank you.
Just, Mr. Galucci, I just want to get a sense from you of kind of the roller coaster ride that the NMAC Center has gone through, and what point you're at right now. If you could, because I mean, essentially, this is a pretty good story based on everything that you've gone through.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor. It has been a bit of a roller coaster ride. We were caught a little off guard with the latest change that came in December. So it has impacted our first quarter in a number of ways, both with the hockey and with events. But we are finding now that we're on the rebound. We're really looking forward to moving fast and furious on a number of different initiatives and projects. We really do hope to make up that time and have a number of other things in place. Currently, we are looking at about 18 different events we're bidding on. We have about 5 more that we'll announce. So it's usually our best period is the first quarter, January through March. So it is a hit, but we are going to do everything we can to limit that exposure, and it is looking promising on the front of moving forward with the number of with the activity we're seeing on a number of fronts.
And how exciting is it for you? You know, the Briar coming up next month. That's going to be a big deal.
Well, it's really exciting. It's one of the crown jewels. We have, really, Lethbridge can host probably 2 or 3 really large major events, and this is one of those 3. The Memorial Cup, I believe we could host quite efficiently as well. So this is one we wanted for some time, and people are pretty excited, and it'll bring people back to the city in the form of tourism, and I think it's going to be really good, and you can see the uptake now that there's some real positivity coming with some of the lifting of the restrictions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions at all? Seeing none, I have a resolution in front of me. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council receive NMAC Center update as information. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Palladino, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much, everyone. Today's meeting is adjourned.